Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened in the issue?
Sure thing, Dan. Kind of reminds me of the end of the Nick Spencer era, so fun times indeed. Okay. We open with Spidey in the Winkler device, and the Goblin chanting to bring him the spear. We then flip over to Chasm in the Winkler device, and we gather this is what Ben was seeing during his experience a few issues ago. Hallows Eve is here for the rescue, and Ben's brow looks furrowed. The Winkler device, did something, but not to him. Did it jump the shark, Dan? That's what I want to know. That's a Happy Days reference, people. We switch over to the Sinister Six, who are gathered in a lair like they're the usual suspects. But who is Kaiser Soze, Dan? Kraven is concerned that the sins of the Green Goblin have been freed, but outside of Vulture, none of the others in the Six seem all that concerned. For Otto, revenge against the living brain is their only concern. The phone rings and it's Norman Osborn, and Norman lets Otto know that he's telegraphed his plans clumsily per usual, and that he's got a big surprise coming in terms of who's going to stop him. Right on cue, the spider-goblin breaks through the door, laughing maniacally, and the gloves are off. Spidey immediately shoots something into Otto's octo-fluid, which causes his arms to go haywire before punching him out cold. We flash over to Oscorp, and Norman is surveying the damage made by the now walking brain when the phone rings again. And it's the ever-enduring Spider-Man comic book amazing friend Kamala Khan, who apparently even has to convince Norman Osborn of her long-standing importance to the legacy and mythos of the comic book series she is currently appearing in. Anyway, she's trying to find Peter, but Norman lets her know that it would be totally illegal of him to talk about how his employees are spending their PTO. Man, I want to work for that company. She calls him Mr. O, which gets him to ask when did he ever give her permission to do that. So Kamala reminds him of that time in the lab where he said she could do that to save time, so Norman confirms and shakes her off the phone. After Kamala gets off the phone, her friend expresses disbelief that Norman lets her call him Mr. O, and Kamala then shakes the earth by saying he actually does it, which means whoever she was talking to, dun dun dun, wasn't Norman Osborn.
More like Mr. O-Face, am I right, Since Past fans?
Wah, wah. Okay. Now that the Spider-Man Mystery Hour is over, we're back to the Spider-Goblin and the Sinister Six. Vulture swoops in for the aerial attack, but Spidey has some magnetic bands that attach to Tomb's wrists and send him crashing. Next up is Electro. Spidey attaches a device to him, and Electro laughs it off as a dampener, but it's in fact something that sends Electro into overdrive, not that overdrive, right near Sandman no less, turning him into glass. Around the corner, a very dated version of the Avengers show up. Spidey sees right through that ruse and spots Mysterio and starts whacking his fishbowl head with a rod, leading Beck to meekly beg for mercy. The last man standing is Kraju. The two go at it until Kraven lands a direct hit with the spear to Spidey, only to find out that Norman's sins and magic spears have no effect on him since it's the Winkler device, that's driving the car right now. Spider-Man starts to squeeze Kraven's face like a melon, and when a teal strand of webbing appears from off-panel and Chasm is here to save the day, probably he hasn't made up his mind. One last epilogue, because that's how we're doing these comics lately, and the walking brain keeps taking Connors and Doug for a ride. This time over to Jonah's apartment, where he's sitting in his pajamas with his Doc Ock arms. So JJJ is now joining the battle. See ya in 2 weeks for an ASM 300 cover homage.